So this time here we will look at motivation and try to investigate a little bit about what is motivation, and especially what is motivation at work. But also you can use this theory to understand anything, or not anything, but yourself in other situations as well. Now, the idea about motivation being the will to perform is by Brooks, and it's quite a really good way to understand motivation, because it is, on an overall basis, it is the will to perform in a specific context. And let's just try to hang on to this one, and then that will be, I think, should be the driving factor for understanding motivation, that it is the will to perform. Now, what does motivation then consist of? Well, there are different ways of understanding motivation, and we will try to dig into at least a couple of these to understand are there different ways to understand motivation, and there is. First of all, I would like us to start with this definition of motivation. And it says here that it's the processes that account for an individual's intensity, direction, and persistence of effort toward attaining a goal, and specifically an organizational goal. Now, we'll go through these because I strongly believe that they give a good idea about how is it that motivation is working. So these elements that we find, the intensity, that is to be understood like how hard a person tries to do a specific job in this context here. Then direction, effort that is channeled toward and consistent with organizational goals. It could also be effort that is channeled toward and consistent with your personal goals. It doesn't make any difference. But since we're working with it from an organizational perspective, this is the way of doing it. But you could easily translate it into a more personal one. And then persistence, how long a person can maintain that effort. Okay, I made a little drawing that I would like us to take a closer look at in order to kind of understand what does it mean. Well, we have here people, could be this one that we're looking at, and we have up here the intensity, and 100% intensity, that's the red line. Let's just make a quick recap. What was intensity? That's how hard a person tries. Okay, it's how hard a person works. So if this person here gives everything he has, then intensity will be 100%. Imagine that it's you that we are talking about. This is time of the day. It's 8 o'clock in the morning. It's 9 o'clock, that's around now. And it's 10 o'clock, it's 11, it's 12, and all the way down to this evening at 10 o'clock. Then if you, at 8 o'clock, when you logged into this course here, if you tried and your effort had an intensity up here, that might be 20, and then gradually from 8 to 9, your intensity grew up, but you may never reach 100%. Then during the rest of the day, you might be studying other courses, and your intensity, the intensity of which you are using yourself, might go up and down a bit and up, and it might go pretty much down here. Then you have something to eat and you take a couple of extra hours, and then at the end, you're really not trying anymore because you might go to sleep. So the intensity and this curve here could illustrate how you are studying. And then it would illustrate that you're not really that intense at this point of time. And here, you are pretty intense, goes down a bit, and then you're really intense again, and then it goes down. But the idea here is that what if you could be really intense from 8 to 10 and be maybe up here? Then you might have some breaks, and then you can go up here again and down. Is that a good way to work? Well, maybe it is if you're a student. But what if you are in a workplace? You work from, let's say, 8 or 7 to 15 or 1600 hours. Your workplace would be interested in you having a very high intensity, and you should preferably have that intensity throughout the whole working day. So when we are looking at it in this way, we can use this as a very nice tool to understand ourselves and our own effort. So are we trying hard enough? And for how long time can we keep on doing it, being really intense? And even though we can go on doing what we're doing for a long time, and we are really intense about it, if we forget the direction, if we forget why we are doing it, and we do not have our goals in mind, then it might not matter that we are quite good at working hard. Because if we are working with the wrong things, it doesn't make sense. So it's a very nice way to understand oneself and maybe understand others, and how can we work with the intensity and persistence. How can we help people understand they should work more intense? Do they need some tools? Do we need to do some things in order to make them understand this? What about the persistence? If we want them to keep on doing the same thing and be really intense throughout the whole workday, what kind of environment can we help them with in order to make it possible for them, and at the same time keep direction? So these are quite good questions that we could look into. Now, motivation theories. When we look at motivation theories, it comes down to basically two different kinds of theories. We have content theories and we have process theories. Some would say that the content theories are more the early kind of theories, and these are more theories that we have experienced later on, that means in the 80s, 90s, and up there. Now, the content theories, much about what motivate, and also the word content indicate that it's something that comes from the inside. That means the researchers have tried to identify what is it inside people that motivate people. And for example, and we'll go through it, but Maslow have his hierarchy of needs, and those researchers found, and that was Maslow, he found that one thing that can motivate people is the sense of belonging or social relatedness. So he would explain it that, okay, something that can motivate a person is being together with other people. That's what motivates. Then other researchers have looked into, for example, goal theory here, self-efficacy, reinforcement, and they belong more to what we call process theories, trying to explain why something motivates and how motivation occurs. So that has more to do with something outside the person, meaning someone is setting a goal for you. Someone is trying to understand your self-efficacy. Someone is enforcing you to. So it's very much about something that goes on outside. But of course, it can sometimes be pretty difficult to differentiate between process and content theories. they do interfere with each other. But for now, let's try to look at the content theories. The first one, Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory. He basically claims that we all have, as a very basic need, a need for physiological issues like we need to have food, we need to have shelter, etc. And then we have some safety and security issues, needs. And when we have these covered, so that is also one of his points, that we need to have the physiological needs covered first. Then we can move on to the safety and security needs. Having this in place, we can move on to social belongingness needs for that. And then we can move on to the need for esteem. And at the end, he would say, if we have covered all of these, then we can start looking into fulfilling our need for self-actualization. So it has a lot to do with needs. And he's claiming that we build upon it. We have to stand on this in order to stand on this, and so forth. And of course, that's also one of the critics about his theory, that why can't you just go along here and jump up and down? And lots of people in Denmark, for example, is born into having physiological and safety needs covered, and they are working right with social needs and esteem and self-actualization needs right away. And also it is developed in, could say, a Western context. It might not be the same if we look into other cultures. Then we have Alderfer, the ERG theory. And what he is more or less is doing is that he's condenses Maslow's human needs into existence needs and relatedness needs and growth needs. So he's kind of saying, we may not have this idea about we have to have one need covered first in order to move on. We can have different kinds of needs in effect at the same time. And you can look into these here, for example, growth needs to progress towards one's ideal self and to complete meaningful tasks. That is about the same thing as Maslow's fourth and fifth level that he's dealing with right here. But not saying that you cannot go there unless you have covered the other two first. On the contrary, Alderfer says you can work with all three at the same time. Okay, another quite popular or well-known is here Herzberg and his two-factor theory. So he's talking about two factors. He's talking about hygiene factors and he's talking about motivation factors. Now, look over here to the left, we have hygiene factors. And hygiene factors could be pay. It could be quality of supervision. And that is research from Herzberg's side saying that quality of supervision, pay, company policies, physical working conditions, etc. These are what he calls hygiene factors. And the point is that if these hygiene factors are there, if a company has quality in their supervision, if they have a decent pay, if they have decent company policies, if they have a okay physical working environment, then I am not dissatisfied. Okay, so it simply means if we are lacking one of these, then we will get dissatisfied. And that's why he calls them hygiene factors. So if they are there, they are not specifically doing anything to motivate us or anything. We are simply not dissatisfied. But if we are not having these hygiene factors in a company, then people tend to be dissatisfied. And then, of course, they are certainly not motivated. So these are the hygiene factors. Looking into over here, the motivation factors. These are the factors that he says and has researched that if we have, for example, promotional opportunities, then I will be satisfied. And that means it will motivate me. And therefore, I'm more satisfied because having promotional opportunities that motivates me to do things. If I have recognition, if I have responsibility, opportunities for growth, personal achievements, etc., that is also something that motivates me, and therefore I'm more satisfied. So the important thing for a company is to make sure that we have the hygiene factors in place, making sure that we are not starting out with people being dissatisfied because these up here are not there. So as a manager, as a leader, make sure you have your hygiene factors in place. Then you can start working with your motivational factors. For example, promotional opportunities, opportunities for personal growth. And that would make people more satisfied. And that would probably make them able to work for a longer time with the right goal in their perspective and with a higher intensity. So that is something that we would really like as a manager at a workplace. Now, the last one from the content theories are about McClellan's theory of needs. It's talking about the need for achievement, the NAC, and that is the drive to excel, and the need for power, and the need for affiliation. The point here is that it's again about needs, but it's more about what is your need in the workplace. Do you need to achieve something? Do you need power? Do you need affiliation? And of course, if you have a person who is more in need of power than in need of affiliation, then it would be different things that would work in order to motivate that person in need of power. How do we make the person in need of power to work with high intensity for a long time with the goal in mind? Well, we probably have to give that person some kind of power, maybe over himself and his own work situation, maybe in form of other power bases as well. And therefore, we wouldn't help that person to work intensely for a long time if we simply sat down and had a friendly talk and asked him or her to go together with us for lunch and have a good time. That simply wouldn't motivate that person. So understanding what is our people's need for achievement, power, and affiliation can help us to understand how do we then motivate them to work with high intensity for a long time for the right goal that we have. Okay, now let's turn to the process theories that were kind of around the person. First, we have this goal setting theory. And the idea is that when we have a goal, that it increases people's performance if, and it is an if the goals are specific. So we cannot have blurry goals like, well, could you just make sure that we kind of have something around this and this? That wouldn't work. We would have to have a specific goal. We would need to have a sales of 100 pieces of this next month. And then that goal should also be difficult. And it should also be accepted by employees. Because if it is not accepted by those guys that we try to impose the goal on, then they might not feel obligated to go for that goal. And then we should make sure that the goal comes with feedback. And if we can make that feedback self-generated, it would be quite nice. Like we have some audits or something that would help salespeople to understand. If it is production people, we might have some daily meetings that yesterday we all did well, we managed to do our production, etc. So we need to make sure that the goals are specific, difficult, and coming with feedback. And then goals, they also say here that public goals are better. That means if someone knows, then it's more likely that you'll actually go for it. Now, often when people have to quit smoking, Some guy says, well, tell other people about it. Tell your family, tell your friends that you're going to quit smoking, because then it becomes a public goal. And then you might get more committed to that particular goal. And then, of course, we have a more simple and familiar task that is better. And it also works very good in Western countries and cultures. Then these goals, in organizational theory, you also have this idea about management by objectives, management by goals, that might be. So when we are converting overall organizational objectives into specific objectives for work units and individuals, here you might think, that sounds a little bit like the balanced scorecard. And yes, it is. It's some of the same principles that we kind of break down the goals. And some of the common ways of doing it is that we have these specific goals, that they are time limits, they have performance feedback, and they are also the people who's working with them, they participate in the decision making. And then an overview from an organizational perspective is like this, that we have the company, and then we break it down to consumer products division, and they have goals, and they break it down to the production department, the sales department, the customer service, and maybe within the production department, they are even broken down into individual objectives. So a company can have this overall idea that goals simply motivates people, and therefore we always break down our company goals to individual goals. It also means that each individual can actually see what I do has an effect on the production department, that has an effect on our consumer products division, that has this effect on our whole company. That might also give a sense of belonging in the same place. Then another theory is a self-efficacy theory. It's about what we believe that we are capable of. So an individual's belief that he or she is capable of performing a task. What is it that make it possible for us to believe that we are capable of performing a task? Well, one of the things are that we simply gain experience. And if we see someone else do or perform a specific task, we might see, that cannot be that difficult. I think I can do that as well. So that will increase our self-efficacy. And also, if someone is trying to convince us that we can actually do this, telling us that, okay, Henrik, you can do this because you have this and this knowledge, you might have this skill, and you have a competence within this area, and you have just seen me doing it, and now you try to do it. And then also I might get energized by this. So by combining these four, we can help people gain higher self-efficacy. And is it good to help people get individuals believe that they are capable of performing a task? Yes, because if they believe they can, then they will also try harder. And that means the intensity of the way they are working will increase, and they might be able to do it for a longer time and then keep the goal in place. And some of these components here could be that the manager sets difficult specific goals, and then the individual has confidence, and the individual sets higher personal self goals for his or her performance, and we have a higher level of job and task performance. So that is what self-efficacy can do. And when the manager understands it right, can work with this self-efficacy, making people think that they can do it. And then they will end up performing, and they will be more satisfied, and that is good for the organization as well. Then we have reinforcement theory, that behavior is a function of consequences. Okay, let's see what. I have four interesting reinforcement things here. If we have positive reinforcement, it simply means that we are providing a reward for a desired behavior. So if you sell more, you get more pay. That is a positive reinforcement. Lots of salespeople are really motivated by that. Then negative reinforcement, removing an unpleasant consequence when the desired behavior occurs. It means we have a behavior here that we would like to see. So that's the desired behavior. And you are getting a reward when you show me that you can act in this specific way. And that means I'm simply removing an unpleasant consequence. So it could be a child, for example, that being told that you are not allowed to go out with your friends before you start doing this and this. And then when the child starts doing this and this, we are saying, okay, we are removing this unpleasant consequence of you not being able to go out with your friends. Then we have punishment. We can simply apply an undesirable condition to eliminate an undesirable behavior. I think that's pretty obvious that we can punish someone and that could make that behavior go away. Then we can work with extinction. Simply means to, if we look at a behavior and we want it to stop, then we can simply not look at it or withhold reinforcement of a behavior. That means we are not rewarding anything if we have a certain behavior. So if people are behaving in a specific way and we do not like that kind of behavior, we can simply choose not to act on it and not to comment on it. And that would make most people, after a while, start thinking, okay, I'm not getting anywhere with this kind of behavior. I better stop and try something else. Then equity theory. That is about employees, how they weigh what they put into a job situation. And that is the input here. And they kind of weigh that up against what they get from it. That's the output. So equity is about input-output ratio. Let's try to see and talk about a little example here. We have the first one, O and I, output, input. And that represents the employee. And over here, you can see when it says IB, that represents a relevant other person. Now, output. What is the output from an employee perspective? The output could be, and now let's take an example from your own situation. I guess that most of you have tried to have spare time job, and when you work there, you get an output. The output is your salary. It could be one example. And what do you put into your spare time job? Well, you put time. So your ratio here is money divided by time. And then if you compare to someone else, namely another person at the same company, let's say that you work 10 hours a week. The other person works 10 hours a week, just like you, and you get paid 1,200 for these 10 hours. And that person over here gets paid 2,000 for those 10 hours. And you believe that you are doing more or less the same job. Then your ratio is way below the other person. So that means you will find yourself having an inequity situation because you are being under rewarded. And that might make you angry, sad, whatever, try to do and find another job. There might be some consequences. We'll see that on the next slide. But you may also find yourself in situations where you have the same output with the same effort that other people, and then you're in equity. At least in the Danish society, we're very much into that one. And here you might find a situation where you get over rewarded compared to others. And for some people, that is really not a nice situation. They can start to feel guilty that they are getting something that they shouldn't have. Okay, so we are using this not only in organizational theory and in a work situation. Lots of us are comparing ourselves and our own effort to others. Just think of you getting a grade, that could be an output, compared to your input. And you might compare yourself to other people getting grades compared to their input. And you might find yourself in an inequity situation of being under-rewarded, or you might find yourself being over-rewarded. So what can a person do, and what do people do in order to work with this here? Your own equation compared to that one of a relevant other. Well, you can change your input. If you, for example, have this situation where you feel that you are getting under-rewarded, then you might start working less. Or you can start to change your outcomes, working with getting more salary or something. You can distort perceptions of yourself, saying, okay, I'm not really into that, so it doesn't really matter. I'm not that good or something else. You can distort perceptions of others. You can simply choose to exchange this one and start comparing yourself to a different person. Or you can simply choose to completely take yourself out of the equation and find a job at another place. So that's some of the consequences of equity theory. And together with equity theory comes what we call about organizational justice, which is that an overall perception of what is fair in the workplace. And that comes together with distributive justice, for example, perceived fairness of outcome. That could be, again, the salary, the equity. Could be about procedural justice and interactional justice. I'm not going into depth with these because they're pretty much self-explaining. Instead, let's move on to expectancy theory. And here we have a model of expectancy theory. And let's try to look at the first one. From this one here, effort performance, we have an individual perceived probability that exiting effort leads to successful performance. Okay, I believe about myself that if I do this, then I will perform really good. Okay, the next step is the belief that successful performance leads to desired outcome. Okay, so if I do this, I believe I do this, I have this really nice performance. And then if I have this nice performance, I will get this particular reward from my organization. And that leads to me fulfilling my personal goals, which is the last one, that the organizational outcome that we have here is fulfilling my goal for having a personal goal here coming through. So that's about expectancy. We expect this coherence between these elements, and we can work with that as well in order to motivate people. If you do this and perform like this, then you will get this. And if we know this is a goal that the person values, then it works. And then, of course, we can work with job engagement and have our, for example, organizations where employees are highly engaged, they have higher levels of productivity, fewer safety incidents, and lower turnover. And people are more happy when you engage people in the job. Okay, then this Hackman and Oldham's work design model is about understanding these areas that we have here, personal and work outcomes. So we would like to have high internal work motivation. We would like people to be highly motivated. We would like to have high work performance. We would like to have high satisfaction. We would like people to have a low absenteeism and turnover, because that is good for the company. Now, how do we get that? Well, here, then we point at if people have experiencing, or if they experience meaningfulness in their job, it will lead to this, because then they will be motivated, they will perform better, etc. And if they experience to be responsible, that would also lead to high quality, more motivated, more satisfaction. And if they know about the results of what they're doing, it will also lead to all of this. So the point here is, how do we create an experience of meaningfulness? Well, we do that by helping people to work with skill variety and have an identity with what they're doing, and that help them to understand the significance of what they're doing. That would lead to experiencing meaningfulness. And we can work with that in the organization by simply involving people, equity theory, and all the other stuff that we have talked about. Same with autonomy. If we give people autonomy, they will experience responsibility. If we give people feedback, they will know about their results. Try to think about yourself. Are you highly motivated, high performers, high satisfied, etc.? Do you show up every time? Now, do we get your feedback as a university? No, only at the exams, basically. Do we get you autonomy? Oh, yes, lots of autonomy in your line of study. Are we giving you skill variety, task identity, task significance? Basically, you have probably chosen it yourself by choosing the education you have. So you are in charge of this, and we could say that we do this by doing not a lot, of course, giving you a few lectures like this and some exercises, and feedback. Yes, when you have done your job and you're all finished, then you will get the result. So we could probably, as a university, do much better in this area to help you have these psychological states in mind, and maybe be more motivated, perform better, be more satisfied in your studies. Okay, let's try to look at this kind of, well, it's expectancy theory, but bringing it all together. As you can see here, we have the individual effort that we talked about before. If we have individual effort and we do this, then we will have a good performance. If I have the good performance, I believe that I will be rewarded by the organization, and I'll then have received and attained my personal goal. For example, then we can combine equity theory by looking into organizational rewards. Do I feel that I'm treated equal to others? Yes, no, maybe, etc. But it has an effect on how I do things. Then over here, we could work with reinforcement theory in order to have the right kind of performance from the employees. We could also work with job design. That's the model I just talked to you about. From individual effort to personal goals, that would help that one. We could have the need theory about need for high achievement going into here. So this is an overview, and you can try to take a closer look at it. But it's not that complex when you dig into it. It's simply just combining the talk that we had here today in these lectures on how do we get people to work, take goals, and are motivated and satisfied more or less at the same time. And then the last thing within motivation will be me saying that we have something that is becoming more and more popular, namely self-determination theory by these guys here, Deci and Ryan. And they say that that all humans need to feel competent, autonomous, and related, and that would lead to intrinsic motivation and well-being. And their point is that whenever you have motivated people who are really highly motivated, it comes from the inside. It's not because you get paid or something. So their idea here is that people prefer to have control over their actions. So when they feel they are forced to do something they previously enjoyed, motivation will decrease. For example, if you do work or voluntary work, and suddenly you start to get paid, lots of research shows that the motivation kind of fade away when you start to get paid for it, because it doesn't give you the same satisfaction anymore. The last thing of today in this lecture here is about culture. And we have talked about culture before, namely when we talked about values. And Hofstede will be introduced, but there's also Hall and Trompenos and Hampton Turner's cultural factors. These three are pretty much referred to and used throughout lots of education about culture and cultural differences. But focus on Hofstede today. Here you have the link. I simply typed in Denmark on this homepage, and I got these results for Denmark. And what does it mean? The power distance, it's 18, it's not a lot. So here you have the explanation that it's the extent to which the less powerful members of institutions and organizations within a country expect and accept that power is distributed unequally. So as we can see in Denmark compared to Germany, we do not accept that we are unequal. So they are more likely in Germany to accept that they are more unequal. And that is what goes on for each of these different parameters in the model. And then simply individualism, the degree of interdependence a society maintains among its members. And here we are quite equal. Now, I have taken each of the areas, masculinity, uncertainty avoidance, long-term, etc., and of course, indulgence. And when we put it all together, for example, with the Czech Republic instead of Germany, we can see there are quite huge differences between this. So in the Czech Republic, they accept the power distance. They accept there's an equality difference between people. And we can use that in order to understand then what might a Czech person act like and behave like when we have that person in our and amongst our employees. So understanding cultural differences and the values also help us to understand why people behave in that specific way. And Hofstede has created this one, an overview, where he says we had different companies. That's from the book, but I would prefer that you look it up at his own internet homepage and find the power distance, etc. These different evaluations of the countries. And that ends this lecture of today.